And we are going to talk financial wellness next. Along with caregiving, as we talked about this morning, is one of our major issues that we work with on the advocacy and the programs front. And unfortunately, we had a cancellation for somebody who was going to talk to us from the programs perspective. But fortunately, we've got a replacement who is incredibly gifted. So let me just say that our two panelists today are colleagues of mine from government affairs who have done a lot of great work on financial security issues. Both of them are government affairs directors, again, from government affairs. Sarah Mashevich does federal work, but used to work on our state team, so she knows the states quite well. And then also with us is Barry Tabenberger, who many of you may know because she does pensions with our state offices. She also does tax, and we're going to talk about a few different things here today on those issues. I'm not going to go into detail on their biographies. Sarah's is in the virtual packet. Barry's will be as soon as I get a chance to upload it, since she agreed kindly to join us late last night. So with that, let me turn it on over to Sarah to talk for a few minutes, and we'll take it from there. So go right ahead, Sarah.
Sure. Are we on? No. There we go. Are we on now? Great. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. It's so good to see all of you today. It's been a few years, as Adam said. I'm a boomerang AARP employee, so I spent 9 years at AARP I started out doing a lot of what Barry does, so public pensions. So I know many of you from that work back in the early 2011, 2012 timeframe. And then I did private sector retirement. So AARP calls it Work and Save. You guys may have heard Auto IRA. So I did a lot of that for many years, went to a law firm, decided that was not for me. I missed all of you and the advocacy, so I came right back. And now I'm doing federal work. So I'm extra excited to be with you guys today because actually I am the daughter of a lifelong educator. My mother taught special education in junior high for almost 40 years. So I am thrilled to be here, and you all are doing God's work, and just so glad you're here. So thank you very much for coming and spending your time with us today. So I'm here to talk about sort of the government affairs perspective on the federal side in terms of retirement security and fraud. I heard you guys had an excellent fraud panelist earlier, so some of this may be repetition, but I'm sure my mother would say that's all for the better, right? As an educator, so I apologize in advance. But we're going to build kind of on this general story you heard from the Fraud Watch Network, and I'll tell you what we're doing on the federal level, and then Barry will tell you sort of how we're doing that symbiotically between the federal and state level. So I will say that not a lot of what I have to say has something to do with, with public pensions and whatnot. It's kind of a step removed from that, but I really think it's kind of a larger ecosystem. Certainly, we've always said part of the reason why we did work on private sector retirement was not just because it's the right thing to do, but because when you're working for one, you're working for all, and it makes it easier to save and protect public pensions if you're also working very vigorously on the private sector side. So with that in mind, let me talk a little bit about what's going on the federal level for private sector retirement. So many folks might be aware, I'm sure, previous conferences they've talked about SECURE. There was originally a bill that was passed in 2019 by that acronym. And that bill did many things. Some people would say it did a lot of amazing things. I think it did a lot of confusing things. But essentially, some of the top lines were, and this will affect some of you, required minimum distribution age was changed. So as you know, if you have an IRA, 401k, et cetera, you're required to take out some of your money if it was pre-tax by a certain age. It used to be 70 and a half. The first SECURE bill made that 72. And they're slowly changing the age. And the reason for that really is the government, in their mind, they gave you a tax deferral, and eventually they always want their money, right? And so at the end of the day, they're trying to claw back their money, but they're pushing that out a little bit further. So that's already in effect now, so retirement plans are currently implementing that. The age limit for IRA contributions was removed. So again, it used to tie into the required minimum distribution, the RMD, but that was removed and done away with. And then also inherited retirement account distributions were limited. You have to take that over a 10-year period, which again, this is all the government trying to get their tax money in an appropriate, what they consider to be an appropriate amount of time, right? And then a couple of interesting pieces. The bill that was already passed, Secure 1, new parents can take penalty-free withdrawals, so that's an interesting change. There was also some adoption language. And then finally, part-time workers, and we're really, really supportive of this. They put in a requirement into federal law that if you are a part-time worker, a long-time part-time worker, so they say that's 3 years, you have to get access to your 401k. Your employer can't say, oh, I don't trust that you're coming in and out, you're a part-time worker, no more of that. And I mention all this because there is a new bill in Congress that's being considered right now. It's being negotiated as we speak that builds on a lot of those efforts. So first and foremost, the part-time worker piece is also going to be ramped up. It was so well received that, in fact, they're going to drop that threshold from 3 years down to 2. So if you're a part-time worker, you've worked in that job for 2 years, you get access to your retirement plan. So we think it's really important. A lot of women are more likely to be impacted. Older workers are more likely to be impacted. So we think it's really important. Additionally, there is a provision in the bill about automatic enrollment. So I think folks in the room are probably pretty used to it. And certainly on the public pension side, once you're vested, you're in, right? That's automatic. That's not the case on the 401k side, on the private sector side. So a lot of times you have to make the active decision to put yourself into a retirement plan. And what we know from the data, especially from states, is that automatic enrollment makes people 20 times more likely to save for retirement, just merely by having the default be that you're in that retirement plan. So the bill under consideration, Secure 2.0 in Congress, would actually make that a requirement, that 401k plans would have to automatically enroll people into the retirement plan. You can always opt out, that's up to you, but the default is people are in the plan. So we're really hoping that that moves through. There's a lot of different variations, and certainly if there's questions later, I can talk about what's in, what's out, what's in the House version, what's in the Senate version, but no need to really go that in depth unless folks want to know. Another priority for us in this bill is paper delivery. So, and this might be something that it feels like a stuck in the mud kind of issue, but in actuality it's not. What we're saying to Congress is everybody should get one paper statement a year from their 401k to tell you where you stand, right? That's your lifetime savings. The least they can do is mail you one piece of paper a year. And I kid you not, the industry is throwing a fit about it being too expensive to send one piece of paper out to everybody a year. Yeah, so we're just trying to keep that in, and we have done a ton of polling, and I don't think it'll surprise anyone, but certainly adults age 50 plus are 66% more likely to like a piece of paper in their hands, but also we found Republicans are much more likely to like a piece of paper, 64% of Republicans in our public polling. And part of that is true, there's a rural divide, and so people don't always have, I don't have to tell you folks, they don't have always access to the internet, and so we want to make sure people have a piece of paper. And then also low-income workers or folks that don't work with a computer every day. If you don't have an email account through your employer, or you don't have a computer, yeah, most of us have cell phones in our pocket, but it becomes exponentially more difficult to figure out where you stand. We're also really interested in the Savers Credit. That is a tax credit that currently is based on income. So if you're lower income and you're saving money for retirement, you can have this sort of graduated tax break. And the Senate is currently considering how to modernize that. And one of the ways they're talking about doing that is having that tax credit, instead of that going back in your pocket, it goes back into your retirement account. So they're saying if you're going to get $1,000 back from the federal government a year because you've been conscientious and you've saved your own money for retirement, we want to double down and effectively have the government match what you're saving. So that's the proposal on Savers Credit. It's a very expensive proposal, so we're not sure that it will stay in, but it's certainly something we've, for a long time, talked about ways to modernize that Savers Credit. And then a few other smaller provisions, lost and found. Again, some of these seem so simple. It's like I'm standing in front of you saying, oh, this is a no-brainer, but they're actually being debated as not being simple in Congress. Lost and found, there is not currently some kind of national database for lost retirement accounts. In the same way, I don't know if anybody's familiar with most state treasurers have unclaimed property funds, right? And so you can go online to a state treasurer and say, oh, I lost that gift card from Amazon, 5 years ago, there's my money. Or I didn't get a paycheck from my last job, I moved out of state, and you can find it. That does not exist for a 401k. And we know that people are more likely to hop from job to job now. And especially, again, with the paper delivery, people don't know where their accounts are, it's hard to access, and everybody has a life, right? You're not currently constantly monitoring your T. Rowe Price account. So this would create basically a federal database just so that it's kind of a lost and found account for all of your 401ks. So that's really exciting. There's a bunch of other provisions, but we think those are really the participant-focused ones. There's a ton of industry-focused ones, but no, you're fine. But so that's really that. The bill again is Secure 2.0, and right now it's under negotiations. It's been passed unanimously in the Senate out of committee, and then on a broadly bipartisan basis in the House. I think it was 435 to like 15, or no, 405 to 10 or so. So I am really excited about the prospects for this, but it's unclear about whether or not we can hold on to all those votes. So that's Secure 2. Let me just check the time really quick. I'm more prolific than I thought. So we are, yeah, right? I told Barry she would be the prolific one, but it's not true. So the other thing we're working on in the retirement space, and I'll just hit this one really quickly before I talk about fraud, is the fiduciary rule. I'm sure folks have talked to you about this in the past, but essentially it is the fiduciary rule is fancy Washington speak for everybody should get investment advice in their own best interest. That's it. It's not that hard. That's the fiduciary status, right? When you talk to someone who's selling you an investment product, that advice should be in your interest, not in the advisor's interest. Right? No brainer. Again, industry doesn't see it that way. So right? Shocker. So we're working with several federal agencies, the Department of Labor, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to try to make sure that those rules are in place and that, more importantly right now, they're enforced. So we're staying on them and making sure that they are going after the bad actors, and a lot of my work is kind of just monitoring that. And then I'm going to shift over to fraud before I give the mic over metaphorically to Barry. You guys heard this morning, it sounds like, from one of our great Fraud Watch Network volunteers. And in fact, I'm sure you heard the data. Last year, we got 97,000 calls on our Fraud Watch Network. 97,000 people called in to say, this is what happened to me. And that varies from, someone having a romance scam to someone coming to them and saying, hey, I heard from your child and they are really in desperate need right now. Could you just go to this Bitcoin cryptocurrency ATM and transfer them money immediately, right? And this happens all the time. So for a long time, AARP has done the programmatic individual outreach work on fraud, but we've been less, we haven't jumped into the advocacy space as seriously as we are now, thanks in part to Barry's great work. So along those lines, what we know is that actual consumer losses, this is the actual number that the Federal Trade Commission reports, are $5.9 billion with a B in losses a year, 5.9 billion. But it gets worse. That's actual losses, that's reported losses. And we know that people are either embarrassed or, frankly, law enforcement does not actually go after fraudsters. So that's severely underreported. So our data shows that probably the number is more like $56 billion is lost every year to fraud. 56 billion. So we're really spending our time giving a voice to consumers, and we're taking all of that quality data that we're getting from the Fraud Watch Network and bringing it to Congress and bringing it to federal agencies. And we actually had a great win last year. Just to tell you kind of briefly about that, one of the first sort of federal wins we've had is the Fraud and Scam Reduction Act. And that bill does two things. It works on prevention, but it also works on making sure that people have their voices heard and that we have some kind of loss remediation. That's what they're working on as well. So it does that through enhanced coordination with industries, consumer groups like us, law enforcement agencies, et cetera. And it has two key pieces. One is it sets up an advisory group, which AARP actually is sitting on. And that advisory group kind of creates educational materials, and they are hopefully going to be used by retailers and other groups. For example, where you sell a gift card, maybe you'll have some educational material there about fraud, et cetera. The second piece is it creates a new office within the Federal Trade Commission, the advisory office, and it advises specifically about the prevention of fraud relating to seniors. So we're really, really excited that there is more attention being paid to this particular group and to fraud at large. And so they're going to monitor, for instance, all of the mail and television and robocalls and telemarketing for to flag fraud, right? To flag things that are concerning. And so hopefully we're going to get some real movement there. There's also a similar bill that would create similar offices within the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC. And that's going to happen. We're hoping we'll get some movement next year. We've had several webinars. We've got so much uptake on this issue. We've had a webinar with the Consumer and Financial Protection Bureau, which is actually just, again, acronym soup for the consumer watchdog, the federal consumer watchdog. They're holding hearings to talk about fraud, but we held one last week to talk about nursing home debt collection and nefarious processes that folks have in terms of that debt collection. So it's expanded beyond just romance scams and gift cards. It's much broader than that. A few other bills, and then I swear I'm handing it over. We're just to give you the flavor. There's a Senior Security Act, as I mentioned, would create a task force with the SEC. The Investor Justice Act, this is really actually cool for this group. It would create a grant program to create new investor clinics at law schools. So to kind of harness the power of these young, fresh, excited minds and to do some of the work, because what we know is that if you have millions and millions of dollars, a lawyer is going to represent you. If you get defrauded or if you get bad investment advice, that's not a problem. But a regular investor that has maybe at most $10,000, even all the way up till $3 million, you're not going to get someone to take that case. So they're trying to be creative and think about what we can do to make sure those people get some kind of voice and legal protection. We're also working on the Crime Victims Fund, which Barry will talk about, I'm sure. Gift cards, I mentioned. Peer-to-peer apps, I'll just mention those. Zelle, Venmo, any of those where you send your money over the internet without writing a check, they don't work the same as a bank does. So if you get defrauded at a bank, you can call up your bank, and they're covered under the FDIC, and you can say, hey, someone stole my money, and that bank will make you whole most times, 9 times out of 10. That is not the case for Zelle or Venmo or any of those apps. Once you hit the green send the money button, it's lost to you. There is nothing they can do to get back. So we are working with Congress to reverse that, because that's just not fair. And then we're holding a bunch of hearings. In fact, just to flag for you guys, there's a fraud hearing next week in the Senate Aging Committee, and they'll be hearing from individuals, but also from academics to talk about how to prevent fraud moving forward.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And before I turn it over to Barry, let me just say that once again, these things that Sarah was talking about are the sort of things that we're working on the federal level, but our state offices work on as well. And this is where we can partner together between your Retired Educator Association and your state office to get involved in working on these sorts of things. And now I'm going to turn it over to Barry, who's going to talk about some other things that we're working on at AARP.
Oh, hello. Good. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm Barry Tabenberger, and I'm delighted to be here today. But first, I have to tell you how exactly I got here today. So, a few months ago, so I just want to say that, Adam and Al are two not only colleagues, but longtime friends, as is Sarah. So a few months ago, Adam is saying to me, oh, NRTA is having their 75th anniversary, and we're having a conference. To which I say, because I speak to you guys always, oh, I would be delighted to participate. And which Adam and Al say,
no.
We don't need you. It's all good. I said, okay, I'm not invited to the 75th anniversary conference, but okay, they're giving someone else a chance. Okay, and I get over it. Fast forward yesterday, it's like 4 o'clock, and I'm sitting in my office typing on my little computer, and I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, but I answer it anyway. And there's like all this static in the background, and there are 2 voices shouting at me, and I'm having a hard time making them out. And then I hear Adam, Barry, we got a cancellation. And then I hear Al in the back row go, what is she saying? What is she saying? Will she do it? And then I hear Adam saying, Barry, I know it's last minute, but we'd really appreciate it if you come and help. And then I hear Al in the background screaming, tell her we'll give her a beautiful lunch. So that was it. You know, the beautiful lunch part got me, and so here I am with all of you today.
Well,
so I just want you to know that's how I got to you all today.
She will get the lunch if we get through this panel.
Right.
But,
Between the 2 of us.
So I'm delighted to be with you. You know, beautiful lunch notwithstanding. So I also, like Sarah, I work on our government affairs team, and I handle our state advocacy. So what effectively that means, like many of you probably know this, because I know that so many of you work closely with our state offices, is I help support the advocacy work of our 53 state offices. And the areas that I primarily work in, which is why Adam asked me to come and talk about financial wellness, is I handle taxes and budget and public pensions, and the newest part of my portfolio, like Sarah, will also be the fraud issues at the state level. So what I thought I would do is come and share with you all today some of the things that we're working on at the state level that we hope will improve financial wellness for older Americans and their families. Now, I want to tell you something. The last thing I'm talking about is pensions. So I'm going to tell you about all the other stuff we do first, because I think that will be interesting to you folks. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about public pensions, which I know is very near and dear to your heart. So, you know, I'm not the best with social media, but like I try to check LinkedIn, and I have like 5 Facebook friends, so it's all good. But I was on my LinkedIn, and now also with Sarah's information about Zelle, I have to run and tell my kids, because they're like, oh, Zelle me the money, Mom, Zelle me the money. Okay, you got to make sure the money's really getting to them. But I was on LinkedIn, and I noticed that there was a note that said, the newest census information shows that poverty has increased among Americans aged 65 and older from 8.9% in 2020 to 10.3% in 2021. And the little blurb went on to say that older Americans were the only group where poverty increased. And I thought that was, you know, very noteworthy for this particular session. Because what I think that I try to do, and I work very closely with our state offices, and I know you guys do as well, is advocate for initiatives that improve financial wellness for older Americans and their families. And the way we like to say it is that help older Americans and their families keep more of their hard-earned money or their hard-earned benefits. And so now I just kind of want to go into some of the issues that we're working on at the state level, many of which might, in fact, impact you and your family members. So there are a couple of areas I think you'll find interesting. First, I'm just going to list them out. So we do quite a bit of advocacy in the property tax relief area. And I'm not sure how much of that you folks know. We really feel that property tax relief, targeted property tax relief, is imperative for keeping older people in their own homes and communities, right? So many older Americans are house rich, but cash poor, if I might say it like that, and they're being priced out of their homes. So we have many, many of our state offices who are working on property tax relief measures to increase relief, to increase age eligibility, to increase the nature of the programs that are accessible to older people and their families. And we, a few years ago, a small working group, myself and a couple of other colleagues in state offices, developed 3 model bills that our state offices have been working on. One is a circuit breaker bill. So basically what it would do is When your property tax becomes more than a certain percentage of your income, that amount of your property tax gets forgiven. The next one is a deferral bill, which allows somebody living in their home to defer paying their property taxes until they pass away or the house is sold, in which case the tax is paid back with interest, but reasonable interest. And the last one is a monthly payment bill. So it might be a lot for folks, especially older folks, to pay their property taxes twice a year or once a year in a large payment. And this idea would be to pay your property tax like you pay every other bill, once a month. So those are three measures that our state offices have been working on across the country, trying to get over the finish line in various shapes and forms. Now, fast forward to 2022, and this little working group has kind of, gotten together again to look more closely what else can be done. And I wanted to let you know one of the big issues we're focused on now is the whole idea of assessments. Because we hear a lot, and let me just preface something I should have said at the outset. I talk to all 53 of our state offices all the time. Sarah and I, when she was a state advocate and now me, we don't just work with a few state offices, we work across the country with everyone. The biggest issues that they hear about, one of the biggest issues, polls demonstrate this, just rhetoric conversations demonstrate this, are the concern about property taxes, okay? One of the things that we're hearing a lot about is the fact that folks are unsure about how their assessment is calculated, that one day they get an assessment, they have no idea where it comes from, how it's created, what its impact might be. So one of the things we're working on this year, a model bill like we'd like to try to put together for our state offices, will deal with some sort of transparency and accountability in assessments, so that the taxpayer, at least to start, will understand where the assessor got this number from. And that, we think, will be at least a helpful starting point. We may look at some other issues well, maybe like truth in taxation, so that if your property taxes are going to go up, the local government needs to say to you, here's why we need the additional revenue. So your taxes are not, you understand where the revenue's going. And to be clear, AARP understands what an important source of revenue property taxes are for localities. We know that they provide all these essential services that you guys rely on, that we all rely on. So we definitely want to take care in how we address the issue, but we do want there to be transparency and accountability and help so that you can age in your own home and communities, and so that we all can. So that's one area I wanted to share with you that we're working on that I'm not sure, outside of a little group who might work on these issues, folks know about. Another issue that I also think is important to financial wellness that you might have heard from our caregiver folks, because you might think it's more of a health issue, but I work on it because it's a tax issue, is a caregiver tax credit. Now, we are trying very hard across the country in each state to enact a state caregiver tax credit. And I pulled from some of our data online, some statistics. I know you guys know this. The number of caregivers in the US in 2020 was nearly 48 million. The average annual amount caregivers spend on caregiving, that's helping their loved ones in many shapes and forms, is $7,242. And we have state-specific data, what these numbers are in each state. So what we've been trying to do at both the federal level, which I won't go into because I am a state advocate, but also in states across the country, is enact a caregiver tax credit that will give caregivers who care for certain recipients some kind of tax credit back for the hard work and expenses they pay toward taking care of their loved one. And every bill is designed a little differently. Sometimes the care recipient is 18. Sometimes the care recipient needs to be 60 plus. There are a variety of expenses that will be covered: respite care, a home health care aid, home modifications. But it's a little something to provide to the caregiver for all the hard work that they do, and frankly, the billions of dollars they save the country by doing this unpaid family caregiving. So I just, I'm not sure if you folks know about that, but I want you to know also, we feel that that is another tool in the toolkit to help move toward financial wellness, and I want to share that with you. A third issue that we're working on, and this will not impact too many of you, but it will impact some of you, is the whole issue, and I have a colleague back there in Montana, and he knows about this issue, is the issue of the taxation of state Social Security benefits. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but in 12 states around the country, Social Security benefits are in fact taxed. Now, there are 9 states with no income tax, so those states are not taxing Social Security benefits. But the rest of the states, they exempt Social Security benefits from taxation. But you do have these 12 states that tax these hard-earned benefits. And what our state office has been doing over the past couple of years is trying to chip away at the taxation of these benefits. Now, recently, Nebraska was very successful. By 2025, Social Security benefits in Nebraska will no longer be taxed. In many other states around the country, we are raising the taxation thresholds so that more and more of your Social Security benefit, if you're in those states, will be protected from taxation. And our goal, of course, because there's a cost that comes with this, always, we're always balancing, it's that cost-benefit analysis. We're really targeting these savings for lower and middle income retirees. So I wanted you to know about that effort that's going on across the country as well. Another thing which I think is sort of interesting, especially in these inflationary times, is do you know that there are 13 states that tax food? Sales tax on food. You may be in one of them. Well, in Kansas, our state office advocated to exempt their sales tax, to exempt groceries in Kansas from the state sales tax, and they, along with their coalition folks, were in fact successful. And we are again seeing some state offices chip away at this around the country. So I just wanted to raise that with you guys as well. Now I want to turn for a minute to fraud. I want to build on what Sarah said, but I just want to tell you a personal experience. So my mom is an amazing woman, and she was a high school principal. So she really is like a no-nonsense lady. You really can't pull anything over her eyes, okay? But, she really, her grandchildren, she loves her grandchildren. What are they doing? Where are they going? Are they well? Are they blah, 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 blah. Okay, so she's very concerned about them. So I would say about a year ago, this is what transpires. Somebody calls her on the phone, and you might have been, a subject to this as well, and on the other end of the phone, the person says, "Grandma, I was in a car accident, a terrible car accident. They're taking me to jail. I'm here with my attorney. He says I need $35,000 to get me out. Don't call Mom." Meaning me, okay. "Hold on, my attorney wants to talk to you." So somebody else gets on the phone and then basically says to her, "Look, I can help your grandson. We don't need to involve his parents. I need $35,000 immediately for my bill and to pay the bonds." Well, my mother hears something about her grandson, and her head starts spinning. She doesn't even think to call me. She's just like, "Oh my God, I got to get my grandson out of jail." She literally is running out of the house to get in the car to run to the bank when my brother pulls up in front of the house. Just in the neighborhood, he was doing some work in the area and decided to stop by. And he said, "Mom, where are you running?" She said, "I can't tell you." He said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "I can't tell you." He said, "Mom, what, because he sees that she's upset. He goes, "I'm not letting you get in the car. I can't tell you." "Mom, come in. If I tell you, something bad will happen to Benjamin." Now he's like, "You got to go in the house and sit down." Anyway, long story short, he convinces her to come back in the house, sit down. She tells the story, and he's like, $35,000? Ben's in jail. Did you call Barry? Anyway, they call me. Sure enough, Benjamin was not in jail, people, okay? If my brother had not come home, I'm telling you, and when I mean to tell you that this can happen, I say this to you only because it made me think how this can happen to anybody. I tried. my whole life to pull things over this woman's eyes. You can't do it, all right? You can't do it. But believe me, I tried. And you can't do it, but $35,000. Now, I want to just tell you the funniest thing. When that same fraudster called my mother-in-law, she's like, yeah, collecting checks. My mother runs to the bank. But, okay. So I keep this story in the back of my mind, and I want to tell you that we are going to do more advocacy engagement on fraud. What we are saying to each other now, Sarah, myself, our fraud partners at the Fraud Network, is that we don't think we can simply educate ourselves out of this crisis, right? So like educating people is very important. Now my mother knows if anybody ever calls her again, she's hanging up on their head. She's told every friend she ever has, right? But we need to sort of do some advocacy work, maybe enact some legislation to get this issue under control, and it can be a bit of an uphill battle. I want to tell you a couple of things at the state level we see happening. Many of our states are involved in legislation seeking to regulate robocalls and spoofing. And spoofing is when it looks like the local number, like it's like we're a 301 area code, right? So it's a 301 number, blah, blah, blah after it, and I think, oh, maybe it's a neighbor, but it's not, it's a scammer. So to regulate spoofing, to regulate robocalls, to require that if somebody's leaving an automated message with a resident, they have the consent of that resident. And if all of this does not happen, then there will be criminal and civil penalties imposed. So that's one way we're looking at this, is to increase criminal and civil penalties. There's also been some legislation at the state level to regulate automatic renewals. Now, I'm just going to tell you that my Weight Watchers has been renewing itself for the past 2 years. My husband is now, how much have we paid in Weight Watchers? So I just want to say that, some of these things, they just keep renewing, and we have to get automatic renewals under control. People have to understand how to stop their renewal. They're paying more in the renewal than they did in the original subscription to begin with. That's another issue we're looking at across the country. And then lastly, and I know we're getting to time, I'll mention one thing to you. This is something new and interesting that Sarah and I are looking at in the fraud space. We're about to roll it out to our state offices. It's the idea of developing some sort of victims restitution fund. So right now, as I understand it, attorneys general, there's no impetus for them to bring these fraud cases because there's very little that happens to the fraudster and very little restitution for the victim. By creating a victim restitution fund, so in other words, Attorney General will bring a criminal action. Even if he or she can't get restitution in that particular action, there'd be sort of a box checked saying, look, we determined that there was fraud in that case perpetrated against these people. So then you put that box over there. Then there are larger cases brought by the Attorney General where maybe you're bringing a case against a telecom company, where there is a deeper pocket, and that company pays civil penalties. And those civil penalties usually just go into the general fund. The idea is to take those civil penalty monies and instead of put them into the general fund, put them in a victim restitution fund. So when the Attorney General brings a case, there are victims, and there's no way to recoup those victims, you can take the money from the Victim Restitution Fund and give these victims some restitution. Now again, would it have to be passed on a state-to-state basis? And our state offices, I know, are very excited to begin to work with their AGs on this. But what it would also do is give the AGs an incentive to go after these people where right now there isn't any. So we, Sarah and I are looking at that. She was so good on the call yesterday. She's like, I'm making an Excel spreadsheet, which I could never do, about who's going to do what job and when, and we're going to try to get this across the finish line. So that gives you a bit of an overview. I did not get to pensions, and I know I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to let Adam ask me that question when we turn to questions.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I had told Barry, who was a great pinch hitter, that we did not put pensions on the agenda because we always do it at the advocacy conference, and it turns out we're not going to get to pensions today either. But that's fine because you can always ask questions about pensions to me, and then I'll ask them to Barry. So, and again, this is all stuff that we can work on together. We've got time for a couple of questions from the audience. So raise your hand if you've got a question. If not, I will ask them a question. But Kelly's coming around with a microphone. You've got 2 minutes to talk pensions.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Folks, I want to talk pensions for 2 minutes. Everybody have your pen, because I'm going to give you a little link I think is really good. So one of the biggest issues we're hearing about in the pension area, as you can imagine now, is the whole COLA issue, right? Cost of living increases. So we work really closely with the National Association of State Retirement Administrators. They're the organization that represents the executive directors of the state retirement systems. They did a fabulous brief on COLAs that I think would be great for you guys to look at.
That's
I
wonderful.
want to give this to you. It's really easy. It's www.nasra, that's N-A-S as in Sam, R-A.org /COLA brief, COLABRIEF, all one word. I will tell you that it's really worth looking at it. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. www.nasra, N-A-S as in Sam, R-A.org /COLA, COLABRIEF, as in Frank. I think that'll give you a lot of great information about what is happening in the COLA world right now. I know that this is an issue that several of our state offices are looking at, that I know that many of you do get COLAs, but many of you do not. Several states authorized ad hoc COLAs this year because it was like 20 years since their retirees had gotten a COLA. And that is one of the big things we're hearing about now in the pension world. We might expect some other changes coming our way, low returns, high inflation. But I just have to say one thing. Adam's going to be mad at me, but I'm reading you this. Listen to this. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College did a paper, Public Pensions Contend with Falling Markets and Rising Inflation. I copied this and I wrote it for you. So the person who's writing the blurb says, my colleague just released an update on the state of public pensions in the wake of falling markets and rising inflation. Despite the recent alarm about the impact of lower asset prices and higher inflation on pension finance, his assessment is relatively sanguine. Data for 2021 and projections for 2022 suggest that the aggregate actuarial funded ratio rose by 4 percentage points in 2021 and decreased only by 3 percentage points in 2022. While the rise and fall tracks with stock market performance over this period, the impact of market fluctuations is muted significantly due to actuarial smoothing techniques used when reporting actuarial assets. Nevertheless, the bottom line is that market declines erased some, but not all, of the gains from 2021. And I wanted to read that to you because those folks at Boston College are very objective, and I thought it was a good summary of how the sky is not falling in pensions, And AARP and our state offices are going to continue to protect public pensions and our advocacy. I say it to this group and to Sarah because they are the only people that I can really say it to who really believe me. A defined benefit pension plan is still unparalleled in terms of savings for retirement security, and AARP is going to continue to work to protect public pensions. So.
Yeah, they are unparalleled. We are gonna keep working on it, and with that, before I make an announcement about lunch, I want to say that this panel was unparalleled, and join me in thanking Sarah and Barry.